Rosie. I am the events coordinator here at Readers Books. We have had this event on our minds since we knew the book was coming out, and it has been something of a trial of errors getting here. So you'll see later on in a presentation that Bernie put together that the original date of this was supposed to be in September. So we're just delighted that we can have it now. I think that one of the best things about working as an events coordinator and at Readers in general is you just find out how amazing this town is and how there are these incredible people that just are here and you might not have known about it. And Bernie is definitely one of these people. So his bio is just amazingly impressive. And we are so lucky to have him here in town. This particular book right here, The Power of Tranquility, anyway, Dr. Bernie Krause, who is here with us tonight, he began his professional career as a recording engineer and as a backup studio guitarist for early Motown sessions while attending the University of Michigan. After graduation, he joined the Weavers with Pete Seeger. He filled the tenor position that Pete Seeger had, performed in Carnegie Hall with them in 1963. And after the Weavers disbanded, Bernie and his late music partner, Paul Beaver, introduced the Moog synthesizer to pop music and film. Bernie's work is featured on many albums, including George Harrison's, Mick Jagger's, David Byrne, Brian Eno, Van Morrison, Peter Gabriel, The Byrds, and The Doors, including their own albums as well. And you can hear some of his sound work on over 35 major feature films. So if you've seen Apocalypse Now or Performance, Love Story, Castaway, or Rosemary's Baby, you have heard his work. So in 1981, after he got a doctorate in bioacoustics, Bernie pivoted to another career and became the founder of the soundscape ecology, a new field of study that focuses on marine and terrestrial soundscapes of remaining wild habitats. And as a sound designer, you can hear his sound sculptures at major public venues like the California Academy of Science, the Smithsonian, the American Museum of Natural History, and several London venues. So you might know him as the author of The Great Animal Orchestra, which is the history of how animals have taught us to dance and to sing. He's also the co-composer of a symphony commissioned by the BBC, which was created with an Oxford colleague, Richard Blackford. Together, they composed Biophony, which is a ballet score that was commissioned by the Alonzo King Lines Ballet. In a recent worldwide fine art expedition of his work, The Great Animal Orchestra exhibit was commissioned by the founder Cartier pour l'Art de Contemporanéen. Sorry, it's been years since my French, which is in Paris, and it's been featured worldwide. It's soon going to be in Sydney, Australia, which I think is just hugely exciting. So this book, The Power of Tranquility in a Very Noisy World, was released in late September, and that is going to be the subject of tonight's talk. Bernie, would you like to say anything before I start up the video?
I don't know what else to say.
It's a very thorough bio, right? I guess I really should add in the key things here is that the book is available here at Readers Books. You can call us to reserve your copy or to buy it via the phone. You can buy it online at our website, which is readersbooks.com. I think that's what we've got. So let me try and navigate us to the video. Get this going.
My name is Bernie Krause, and I'm a soundscape ecologist, a new field I help to introduce to the biological sciences and fine art. My new book, The Power of Tranquility in a Very Noisy World, brings into focus many aspects of noise not previously considered. For the past 50 years, I've been recording the sounds of living organisms, large and microscopic, marine and terrestrial. These biophonies, or the collective expressions emanating from wild habitats that remain, are key to a more complete understanding of natural world occurrences. Yet aside from climate change, resource extraction, and land transformation, one major problem we have to overcome when protecting these amazing wild habitats and their voices is the noise that we humans generate. Because we are intrinsically connected to every living organism, human noise affects wildlife in the same manner it affects us. The Power of Tranquility sheds new light on that challenge, an issue that touches every aspect of our lives. In the end, tranquility beats noise every time. And now, some observations on that subject. Recently, I was tasked to come up with a definition of the term noise, that elusive special class of turbulence that is separate and unique from all others in our life experience. In the process, I'll be illustrating how some of the noises we produce harm us and other organisms, and what the hell we can do about it individually and collectively. It turns out that I've just written a book about that very subject. The Power of Tranquility in a Very Noisy World covers all those points. Well, why does this matter? Well, it affects every aspect of our lives, whether it's religion, academics, culture, language, politics, music, communications, health, or just plain leisure activities, and a whole host of others. David Bowie once suggested that tomorrow belongs to those who can hear it coming. But you'll never be able to hear it coming if the signals are masked by noise. Hey, check it out. Even if the signals were clearly transmitted and received, begin by asking, who among us has the requisite set of ears to hear what's headed our way? A host of stuff lurking just over the horizon. Well, let's jump right in. On any given virus-normal summer weekend, racetracks such as Sonoma Raceway feature drag races and other events that delight 100,000 fans with extremely high levels of noise, and where the spill of each event's low-frequency rumble can be heard and recorded at our home 18 miles away. Ask any attendee at these gatherings why they come, and they'll tell you that they go for the illusion of power that the intense noise produces. In fact, if it weren't for the noise, these events would be unlikely to draw a fraction of those numbers. Speaking of noise and power, that reminds me of a comment made by James Watt, Ronald Reagan's Secretary of the Interior. Shortly after Watt defunded the U.S. Office of Noise Abatement in 1982, a federal bureau that had played an important role in the Environmental Protection Agency, the office was left with no resources to enforce its safe sound environment mandates. When asked his reason for targeting that group, Watt responded, "Noise is power, and the noisier we are as Americans, the more powerful we appear to be to others." Then there are the noises of war, and the despicable manner in which humans sometimes treat each other and members of other species, with consequences too severe to rehash here. But there's one small incident worth noting because it amplifies Watt's distorted perspective of noise in America. In 2000, I attended a soundscape meeting at the U.S. Department of Interior and the National Park Service in Washington, D.C. The purpose of the meeting was to discuss how particular types of sound might impact wildlife. One biologist from the U.S. Army's Aberdeen Proving Ground described how cannon fire was being tested to see if it could successfully drive problematic birds away from the runways there. At the end of her presentation, the presenter was asked if the test was successful. "Not completely," she said, "but I love the sound of artillery. To me, it represents the sound of freedom." The room grew dead silent for a moment because no one knew quite what to say. Eager to break the ice, I raised my hand and asked, "But, Lieutenant, doesn't that depend on which side of the cannon you're standing?" Spoiler alert, for the airport employees in Gloucestershire, England, the landing site for the royal family near their country estates, That problem was solved in the late 90s by playing, are you ready for this, Tina Turner tracks. No kidding. It was a big deal in the late 90s. Google it. So what is noise? Acoustic noise is that part of the soundscape that is distracting, unwanted, and contains no useful contextual information. Either that, or the timbres and levels are just plain harmful or even deadly to us as well as other critters within range of its signal. And yes, certain types of acoustic noise will kill you. More on this in a moment, but do keep in mind that not all noise is acoustic. And what, you may ask, is a soundscape? Soundscapes are all of the sounds that reach our ears from whatever source. Soundscapes are comprised of three basic sources. The first and oldest on Earth is the geophony. The term geophony is made up of the Greek prefix geo, meaning earth, and the Greek suffix phone, meaning sound. So it includes all the non-biological natural sound produced by wind, water, and movement of the land. The whole concept goes back 4.5 billion years to the formation of the planet, a time signified by awesome textures of sound. Think of volcanic explosions, huge storms, earthquakes, avalanches, sounds of tidal waves, tornadoes, and fierce windstorms, those kinds of events. But there was nothing to hear geophonies until organisms evolved sometime between 750 and 500 million years ago. The sound that these organisms produce collectively and individually is referred to as the biophony. Bio meaning life, and phone again meaning sound, the sounds of living organisms. And finally, we get to human-generated sound, a separate category primarily because we've lost our essential connection to the natural world, and we now experience it through the limited ways in which we describe our place here. For example, there's nature, and then there's us. Anthropophony is the term for this third category. It's divided into two subclasses: controlled sound, like music, language, and theater, and incoherent or chaotic sound, which I refer to as noise. In the human sense, the larger percentage of that subcategory is electromechanical, or technophonic. And it's from this category, a subclass of primarily human-generated signal, that sound becomes noise. The incoherent or chaotic qualities of noise are at the very center of our quickly evolving dystopia, one in which most of us who are truly good listeners find ourselves. There's the incessant and destabilizing noise of our media sources. Where do we turn for truth and reassurance? How do we abstract consonants from all of the discordant messages we get? Well, there's visual noise. Watch the complex images on the screens of almost any cable news show, or see the urban light pollution generated by populated regions of the globe from satellite or International Space Station imagery. If you want to know how much noise there is in your world, take your smartphone outside and try to record an American robin, the most common American bird with a bright orange breast and present throughout most of the year in most U.S. locations. When you play back your recording, note how many other sounds are present. And if you just want to hear the robin, then all the other sounds constitute noise. And there is a new source of noise to be aware of: the Long-Range Acoustic Device, or LRAD, a diabolical piece of gear used by the military and now local police forces to control crowds. I had an early beta version of this device to test, and trust me, even in human-friendly configurations like I had, you don't want to be at the receiving end of this acoustically focused technology. It's the kind of noise you never want to hear. It hurts, and the damage can be permanent. Yet there are other stories to keep in mind. Those who have lost their hearing as a result of attending the George Floyd civil rights marches recently are all eager to tell their unfortunate stories. The loudest sound ever produced on Earth was not generated by the Who, 125 dB, or Motorhead, 137.5 dB. It was an Indonesian volcano that lost its cool in 1883. Located on an island in the Krakatoa archipelago, the Krakatoa sound pressure level was estimated at 180 dB, just 14 dB short of the loudest physically possible sound in the Earth's atmosphere. It was a geophonic blast so loud that, depending on which historical account you read, it ruptured the eardrums of people 40 miles away, traveled around the world through the atmosphere 4 times as a physically sensed infrasound jolt, and was clearly heard 3,000 miles from the source. Humans have yet to reproduce the extraordinary level of that detonation. By the way, the loudest sustained sound on Earth's surface cannot possibly exceed 194 dB, which is the point at which the amplitude of the sound wave is so intense that the low-pressure wave component is a perfect vacuum, and where the wave alternates between double the atmospheric pressure and no air at all. No living organism can survive an audio signal that intense. However, the sounds we do create can be troublesome enough. Think for a moment of the loudest sound you've ever heard or the sound that was most disturbing. Noise need not be loud. The noise of a dripping faucet can drive some people nuts. The noise of a 2-cycle lawnmower or a leaf blower need not be loud, but it still irritates, even if it's a block away. So does the constant yipping of a neighbor's dog just when you're drifting off to sleep, or 2 people having a contentious argument. Oprah Winfrey won't tolerate the signal of anyone chewing gum in her presence. That kind of human response to noise is called misophonia. And oh yes, one other thing. Did you know that certain restaurants are designed to make you uncomfortable through the use of noise? Owners know that when creating a space with hard-surfaced walls and floors, with no tablecloths, carpets, or soft textures to cut down reverberation, then add a sound system, the noise will do 3 things. Number 1, it will attract vulnerable groups of people to the chaos, making them think that noise equals action. Then, number 2, it'll make you tired and diminish your ability to taste the food as a direct result of exposure to high noise levels. This setting encourages quick turnover and getting you out the door as quickly as possible. It's a perfect example of gastro-capitalism. This is true for many hot, high-priced restaurants that attract young crowds, with, you guessed it, noise. It's a gimmick, folks. We've all been seduced to noise sources. They almost never fail to capture our attention, distracting us from other more important issues. The main problem with noise is that if it's not totally distracting to some, it masks the informative sound signals we all need to hear. And here's the kicker. If it's too loud and constant, you'll likely become ill from the stress it causes. The World Health Organization's report on sound in the EU even concluded that relentless exposure to some types of anthropophony will eventually cause death in some humans. There's city noise, featuring traffic and construction and the urgency of first responder sirens connoting issues of life and death. There are those who feel the need to be noticed by imposing the fierce output of their 808 subwoofers or straight-piping cycle rigs. To Americans, remember, noise is power. And now, there's the more frequent noise of low-flying military or law enforcement helicopters or fire mitigation aircraft defending our rural areas. Well, what do we do about all this racket? First, we need to identify all of the sources that contribute to our sonic world and separate them into proper categories. We'll do that by what we call ear-cleaning sound walks. Leaving your cell phone at home, take a short walk around the block, and if nothing else, the exercise is good activity. Really concentrate and listen carefully to the different kinds of sounds you hear. Which ones fit into the 3 categories mentioned earlier? Name them if you can. Write them down in a notebook. No problem if you can't name the different species of birds. Just note the difference between a bird and a mammal. Note the difference between the sound of a car or a bus or a truck. Listen to the different types of aircraft flying overhead. The distinction between a jet and a propeller-driven airplane is pretty dramatic. So is the difference between a jet and a helicopter. Each of these sources will have a different impact on you. Note what they are. What category do ground-level transport signals fit into? What about aircraft? What about the sound of wind in the trees? Why don't human-generated sounds qualify as biophonies, or do they? Do the same qualitative listening in various rooms in your dwelling place. Which rooms seem the quietest and most tranquil? The room that gets the highest rating in that category is the one you'll want to sleep in. In most cases, the more tranquil the space, the easier it is to relax and get a good night's rest. In our otherwise chaotic world, you'll need all the stress-free rest you can get. In the middle of your room, clap your hands and listen for short amounts of echo or reverberation. If it's like most structures, the room will have parallel walls and ceilings parallel to the floor. To eliminate the reverb, those surfaces need to be broken up and made uneven in relationship to one another. Another way to reduce reverb, drop some carpet on the floor. You can get cheap but really good remnant cuts at most carpet dealers. And if that doesn't quite do it, get some thick curtains for the windows and walls. It makes a big difference to have a space that's really quiet and peaceful. Fabric helps. Then, when there is sound introduced into your private space, at least it'll be a type of your choosing, and hopefully those that are life-affirming for you. Outside is a different animal. Cities tend to be noisy and incoherently disruptive. It's up to you to find places to visit that are quiet. Sometimes parks meet those criteria. Try to find green spaces that meet your need for tranquility by first doing the sound walk mentioned a few minutes ago. What do you hear that makes you feel good? What do you hear that doesn't? What are the actions you're willing and able to take to achieve either result? For my wife and I, we finally had to abandon the city for the middle ground of a rural area, a place with still active dirt roads and accessible green spaces nearby. I guarantee you that the more tranquil you can make your life, the healthier you'll feel. And the ways in which sound is allowed to play a role in this case is absolutely key. In the meantime, what can we learn from other cultures? For example, the Bayaka, a group of pygmies living in the remote Zonga-Songa rainforest of the Central African Republic, have one response. The idea of tranquility is central to their survival because it is such a deeply embedded feature of their lives. The rainforest biome has long been home to this semi-nomadic ensemble that traditionally relied solely on the resources the habitat provided to them, the bushmeat that they hunted for food, and the wild plants that they harvested for additional sustenance and medicines. The forest was there to supply whatever they needed, although the Bayaka lived relatively light on the land. One morning in 1984 in New Jersey, an American musicologist named Louis Sarno happened to be listening to a radio program of Bayaka music. He was so captivated by the beauty of the sound that he sold everything he owned. He bought a one-way ticket to Bangui, and he bought a recorder and some microphones and cut most ties with his birthplace, friends, and family. Once on the ground in his newly adopted country, Sarno traveled for several days until he finally caught up with the tribe, all but hidden in their rainforest home. Of the many remarkable attributes of Sarno's life as a musical anthropologist and field recordist, one in particular made me think long and hard about the connection between the biophonies of the natural world and their restorative properties. In fact, my own experience was only amplified by Louis' narrative. As Sarno told the story, during the late decades of the 20th century, a second wave of colonialism, including large conglomerates from Asia and the EU, began large-scale resource removal from the Bayaka's home territory. With the constant noise of accelerated logging of hardwood forests, extraction of diamonds, oil, and the poaching of ivory from the elephant families of the surrounding jungle, The cash economies imposed on the country's ancient cultures by the mega-corporate world replaced the small-scale, as-needed traditional barter exchanges more familiar to the Bayaka. Drawn into the competitive economic and resource-driven models of the West and Asia, tribal members now had to purchase their meager necessities within the imposed cash systems in order to thrive. To acquire enough hard currency, males in their spare time were enticed into the forest to illegally hunt bushmeat protein for the miners, loggers, and administrative personnel, and elephant ivory for export to black markets such as the U.S. and Asia. Meanwhile, the women were lured into prostitution. The neo-capitalistic trade-offs and intimate contact with the foreigners shredded the fragile social and economic structure of their community and introduced levels of trauma and disease not previously known to the Bayaka. The strain on their culture caused many members to become quite ill or to die, raising the question of how they could mitigate the physical and emotional crises that now confronted them. To manage this dilemma, the Bayaka did what they'd always done when faced with turmoil and illness. They disappeared all at once deep into the forest, sometimes for months on end, in order to separate themselves from the colonial bedlam and to heal in remote locations where their forest was still intact. The shamans, who had retained the ancient knowledge of healing herbs and vegetation and how they affected certain diseases and mental conditions, were still able to ply their magical art and craft. And most important, they understood how to integrate the biophonies and geophonies of the forest as curatives for just about everything else. With the biophonies serving as a natural karaoke orchestra with which they performed, the Bayaka would reinstate their ritual songs and dances, again finding solace in the reanimated spirits that could be found everywhere. After sufficient quiet and healing time, the tribal members would reemerge from the forest, healthy and vibrant, only to engage once again in the downward spiral of civilized contact. During the nearly 35 years that Sarno and I worked together until his recent illness and death, what struck me most of all was the way in which the Bayaka, dependent on their ancient connection to the rainforest, were able to sever their seductive ties to civilization and restore some measure of sanity back into their lives, if only momentarily. Can you imagine a healing sonic environment for yourself? What would that sound like? The Japanese have recently come up with a similar solution. It's called forest bathing, or Shinrin-yoku. It's a quest through time spent in forested habitats for more intimate and spiritual connections to the natural world. A simple nature therapy program introduced in the early 1980s by Yoshifumi Miyazaki, a university professor and co-director of the Center for Environmental Sciences at the University of Chiba in Japan, is a largely passive methodology that I was already familiar with from my own encounters with wildlife in the field. Shinrin-yoku, loosely translated, means taking in the medicine of the forest. This evidence-based wellness practice was a direct response to declining health in the Japanese population at the time. The healing energies of the natural world have been known for millennia. This practice is another simple yet powerful way for us to tap into those healing energies that are readily available to all of us, particularly those related to the sonic properties of natural habitats. Extensive research shows that forest bathing offers relief from anxiety and depression, bestows a deeper sense of mental relaxation, better sleep, and an increased feeling of gratitude for being alive, and delivers an overall sense of well-being. When forest bathing, we walk into designated areas after first being given a set of carefully crafted invitations, ways to slow down and to experience the more than human world through a variety of new techniques and our senses. You don't have to cover much distance, but you do need to find a forest. Miyazaki's writings and the stories of the Bayaka confirmed the efficacy of this practice, a process that had taken me many years to acquire. It helped me give voice to my own experiences. Shinrin Yoku inspires us to make time for leisurely strolls in tranquil wooded areas. The simple idea being that a break from the noise in our technosphere, in exchange for a closer relationship to natural world phenomena, conveys enormous benefits. Think of this as powering tranquility. It's a contemporary antidote to the distractions brought on by the constant acoustic dissonance emblematic of our presence. The secret here is a proactive connection to the natural world, far away from the noise produced by our economies of endless consumption, resource depletion, and all their soundscape signifiers. And that means rediscovering our links to the life-affirming features of that atavistic world, which in turn means a rewilding of our aural senses. Once we reorient ourselves to the calm states we acquire as a result, we can never look back. In the realm of pure feelings, nothing, for me, has been more spiritual. Before I reveal some secrets to my life and how it became transformed from a critical case of ADHD to one who is able to navigate with a degree of health not imagined until I was 30, let me convey what I feel is at stake if we fail collectively to heal our sorely abused source of life, this place we call planet Earth. This on a small scale is what will happen in the macro. Elders in the YM tribe tell of a time that they fished all year long at Celilo Falls, a little Native American community west of the Columbia River's midway point. Each season provided lots of fish, including Chinook salmon, bluebacks, steelhead, and coho. When the catch was good, members could harvest a ton of fish a day, soon having enough to supply close and extended family all that was needed for a year with little more than the cost of a couple of balls of twine. In recent history, a major event took place along the Columbia River in the Pacific Northwest. It went totally unnoticed by most of the media, but it profoundly affected those who had lived in the region for thousands of years. On the morning of March 10, 1957, the Army Corps of Engineers ordered the massive steel gates of the newly built Dalles Dam shut tight. This action strangled the natural downstream flow of the river, and as the elders stood on the river bank astonished, a way of life that had sustained them for centuries disappeared in less than a day. It all happened very quickly. 6 hours later and 8 miles upstream, the sacred falls of the YM were completely submerged. That day there wasn't a dry eye on the banks of the Celilo, that tiny village on the river's edge. The elders were not weeping for the loss of salmon. They wept because the river no longer lent its wise voice to the community. The submerged Celilo Falls were dead silent. Members report that with the loss of their natural music, the tribe was plunged into a deeper collective despair than at any time since first contact with the whites. Listen to the sounds around you. What do they convey? If the signals are incoherent and have no real meaning in your short lives, what are you willing to do to change them? Through the lens of soundscape ecology, all of the answers are there. Listening is key. Again, we need to listen up. In order to do that, it's probably a good idea to put a cork in it. People often ask, if I want a quieter, more tranquil life, what can I do? The answer is beyond simple. The path to tranquility lies not in what we do. It's what we choose not to do. The paraphrase of David Bowie's aphorism, "The future belongs to those who can hear it coming," spots a momentary position on our journey through the firmament. Meanwhile, back on Earth, amidst all the noise and fierce ambition, what remains to be heard? The wolf's howl? The blissful voice of 10,000 birds singing up the sun? And where are the frogs and insects that signify a midsummer's night? A whale song in an open ocean? The anxious declaration of an ant? A virus liberating itself from a tiny cell? No, it isn't music, the self-referential echo of our own limitations that restores us. It's a lone cricket awaiting an answer, and our readiness to overhear the implications. Even with eyes wide open, what is essential must first be heard. Jose Emilio Pacheco is right. Night will never be night without the cricket. Go now. The future is waiting. I think you are ready.
Well, I have to say there's an amazing sense of power to be able to mute and unmute myself for something like this. Does anybody have any questions you could, I mean, I know my personal one, you were in music for so long. Do you still listen to any music in your time? Do you focus on listening to music instead of listening to nature and put them in separate categories?
Well, I do listen to music. As a matter of fact, I wrote a symphony. You introduced that in the intro.
Mhm.
So I listen to music a lot, and pretty much all kinds. So I'm still interested to see how music is evolving and how it's changing and how it's what its influences are. So I listen to it just for enjoyment as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, I listen to music.
So there's still music in your life.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
think what I meant was if you are walking or if you're driving through town or something, do you listen to music or do you listen to the soundscape?
I listen mostly to the soundscapes and the sounds that I'm creating
Mhm.
around me, because I don't want to I'm really conscious and conscientious about how sound affects other people, and I don't want to introduce too much of my own sound print into the world.
Mhm.
So I'm careful about that.
I think another thought I had there was how much we must block out if we wear headphones. For example, I was thinking about listening to this, and then how often do people walk down the street wearing headphones, and what are they missing out on that?
Well, what's happening is when people do that, it's their own they're hearing just the stuff that they specifically want to hear and not what's evolving around them. And the world of sound around them is really what's important to keep aware of, and to see how it's affecting you. Because if you have earphones on and you're trying to cross a street and you don't hear the car coming,
Yeah,
there's going to be a problem.
very much so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel like this book is a good one to sort of spread around for people who are interested in mindfulness and in thinking about
Sure.
how
Sure.
that goes?
I was curious how people listen and what they listen for. And the book was really the result of asking a whole lot of people what they felt and what they heard and how sound was really affecting them when they were out in the world. And I mean, I interviewed people as young as 11, 12 years old, because what I found is they're sitting there with little iPods in their ears and they're listening to stuff. And when I tested them, which I did in my studio, what was interesting was that even at 11 and 12 years old, they could not hear the top end of the frequency spectrum. And they lost a third, as much as a third of the frequency spectrum, both of them at the same time, and lost that top end. And I was astonished. I was trying to figure out what it was they were listening to and why. that caused them to lose that high end. And that means that doesn't bode well for what's going to happen in their future.
No, it wouldn't. It looks like James Osborne has a question for you
Sure.
about what does the book focus on? Does it focus more on what an individual can do or what we as a collective can do?
Both.
Both.
Yeah, it covers both ends of things because we're a noisy culture, but individuals are creating the noise. And so it covers both ends of that.
And it looks like Robert Hartsock just pointed out that he spent 3 months in a city and the way that the noise was affecting him really it changed up a lot of things about it. And he asked people if the sound bothered them, and he said after a while they don't hear it. Is that typical that if you hear something for a long time that you just sort of file it away and it's affecting you but not mindfully affecting you?
No, our brains spend a lot of energy filtering out noise that we don't want. And eventually what happens is we become desensitized to the noises that we don't want. But it still has an effect on us. When studies were done about the physiological effects of noise by the World Health Organization, they found that heart rate increased, blood pressure increased, all the physical signs of stress, glucocorticoid enzyme levels, for instance, the normal stress levels were elevated tremendously. And as soon as noise dropped off and people were in a more tranquil environment, these stress levels dropped and people got better sleep and were able to navigate the world in a much more conscientious way.
It sort of seems to me like all of this comes back to a sense of mindfulness about what we put out and what we take in.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have to be aware of that. And this book shows us how we can become conscious of it, of what we're doing and what we're receiving, and how it affects us and how we can pay some attention to those effects. And
Mary in chat, she's pointed out something that's always bothered me too. It's very hard for me to filter out different sounds. So in a restaurant, I'm always asking, turn down this TV. I can't hear what's going on here. Do you find that it varies from person to person quite a bit?
Yeah. I mean, when Kat, my wife, and I go into a restaurant now, I always take, I have a little app on my cell phone, and it measures the sound. And if it's over 75 dB, we walk out because sound affects how you taste food.
Yeah.
And there was a study done at Oxford where this scientist actually did a study on the effects of taste as a result of sound. And the noisier it got, the less people were able to taste.
That's
and so if you're going into a restaurant and it's an expensive, and most of these restaurants are expensive, but one of the neat things, like I said in the talk, is that what we found was that restaurateurs design restaurants specifically to be noisy so that they cause you stress and make you tired. And what they're looking for is they're looking for quick turnover.
Mm-hmm.
So walk into a restaurant with hard surfaces, walls that don't have any padding on them, or ceilings and floors without carpets and stuff like that. What's happening is they want that quick turnover. So which is why they've designed it that way. And then they throw terrible music on, that nobody wants to hear, in these environments. And you got to be really aware of what you're exposing yourself to want to make a change.
Well, firstly, what's that app called?
Oh, I don't know. Let me see. It is called, let me see here. I know I have it somewhere. Where is it? It's called DB. Here it is. I'll show you something right now. Come on. There it is. Okay, you can see, see how it works?
It's a measurement tool, basically.
Yeah, it's a measurement tool.
Perfect.
And the louder I speak, the louder it is, see, it's 80 dB and so on. Okay, so that's what you get. And it's called, I don't know what it's called. Hold on a second. Let me get out of here. This one, and it's only like 99 cents or something like that. It's called dB meter.
Good.
And the other one is called Decibel X. So there
It
are
looks
two
like
of them.
there's a couple options out there.
Yeah,
that you
yeah.
can find.
There's a lot of options.
I wonder how all these parklets will affect people's eating if they're right there and the traffic's going by.
Oh, it's
Can't
noisy.
be, yeah,
No.
can't be very fun. And then also someone's pointed out that sounds can give you positive emotions as well.
Yeah.
And the nature sounds can cause various intense emotions. They pointed out that Lake Superior makes sounds when it's frozen, and it causes just incredible emotion. Do you find that there's any particular very positive natural sound that people should seek out?
Well, all kinds of natural sounds affect people in different ways.
Mhm.
And I have a theory that it's even part of our DNA, that there's a certain soundscape that is part of all of our DNA. If our ancestors grew up in a forest somewhere, it's probably a temperate forest. If they grew up in a tropical forest, it's probably a tropical forest. I mean, all these soundscapes have some resonance with us, and we each like different ones. Some of us like the sound of a stream or a riparian habitat that's along a stream with lots of birds. Some of us like habitats in the jungle somewhere or a subtropical area. So, it all varies. Now, for me, like I said, I have a terrible case of ADHD. And the basic reason that I've done this work, recording natural soundscapes, is because it makes me feel better. And it makes me feel calm. And it's free. And I don't have to take drugs, and I don't have to go for therapy and lay my crap on somebody else. I can, and the birds are very compliant in that way. Mammals too.
You're not going to bill your Medicare.
They don't bill me a cent. I never see them. I never see the invoice.
If you were to ask everyone to do one thing that would help out our collective sound space, what would you ask people to try to do?
Listen. My license plate says écoute, which in French means listen. Yeah.
Just start there.
Yeah.
Now, have you heard the howler monkeys in Knight's Cape?
I have red howlers and brown howlers, depending on whether you're in Central America or in the Amazon. Yep, all of them. It's a wonderful sound.
But those of us who haven't heard it, what would you, how would you describe it?
Only it's much
louder.
It's not. I'm really bad at a howler monkey, but it's something like that.
All right, you're gonna have to bear with me here.
Sure, Adrian and Mary.
Kind of go along with the Song of the Kissidy. Now, I'm also not familiar with the Song of the Kissidy.
No.
Let's see if anybody has any more questions. Would you type it in the chat for me?
Carol Kelly has a raised hand.
Let me see. I'm not seeing Carol, but Mary has pointed out, Mary Jenkins says that she treasures the quiet, and it's because she grew up with a noisy family of 8 kids, and her sister always has the radio or the TV on.
Yeah.
which I can sympathize with. I know a few people who always have something going on in the background, and it doesn't seem very healthy to me.
No, it's not, because your brain has to work so hard to filter that out, to be able to think and concentrate on what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Bernie, what are some of your favorite nature sounds?
I like the sounds of Alaska. And the reason I like that is because it's an area 3 times the size of France with 750,000 people in it. And it's a place you can really get out into the wild. And the wild, I like Bill McKibben's idea of the wild. He says, the wild is a place where you can walk for 2 weeks in any direction and never hit a road or a fence. And it's also a place where there are no wildlife rangers telling you about the life cycle of a bear. And finally, the wild is a place where there's nothing to buy. So that's Alaska for me.
What's your favorite bird or animal sound?
Wow.
Hard to pick.
It depends on the day. I mean, I have favorite places. So I hear the whole ambience. I'm more interested in the biophonies and the collective sound that's created in each habitat. And for me, again, it's always Alaska, because it's so magical and clean, and there's nothing, there's not a lot of noise around it that interferes.
And Carol Kelly wanted to share that she went to the Great Animal Orchestra in Paris, and it just absolutely blew her mind. She started crying somewhere around the whales. And do you know if it'll be recorded or played anywhere near here?
Yes, it's going to be at the Exploratorium next April, and it opens. It's going to be a long installed piece. This is a piece that was commissioned by the Fondation Cartier in Paris in 2014, and it premiered there in 2016 at the museum, at the Cartier Museum and of Contemporary Art. And it's really an extraordinary piece. The Cartier folks put 3.5 million euros into developing this work. And I mean, I didn't get it, but that's what it took.
But they put it in.
And it's really, really powerful.
And we're talking April 2023, right? So not in a couple months, but in a year or so.
Exploratorium.
Good. It's just very funny because I think of the Exploratorium as such a loud place. So
well,
it's
interesting that you say that. Most of these museums and public spaces are loud. But what Cartier requires of any of these spaces that want to show this piece is they have to have a dedicated soundproofed room in order to perform it. And they create these theaters that are like 60 by 45 feet by 15 feet tall. And there are these, nice sized theaters where, 100 people in non-COVID times can fit. And what happens is, what's interesting about it is that the spectrograms, which are graphic illustrations of sound, are streamed across 3 different walls of these spaces. And the visual is actually supporting the sound, which is kind of a twist on how we use sound. Typically, sound is the last thing that's ever done in a film, last thing that's ever considered and mixed. So they wait till the film is cut, and then they introduce sound and sound effects and music and the rest of it. Last thing they do. This is what's happening here is the sound is first, and then the visual supports the sound, which is very, very different from the model that we've been using in our culture.
I like that, the way it will flip it over on its head that way. Pick out what's more important.
Yeah, and it's the most popular. Over 1 million people have seen it so far in just 6 venues.
It's crazy.
That's pretty cool.
Now, what are you working on now?
Just doing more installations with Cartier
Mhm.
because they're really supportive of this work.
It's wonderful. It's a really good
Yeah.
thing.
What's interesting was we haven't been able to get much support in the US,
Huh.
but in Europe and Asia and Latin America and Africa, every place else in China, every place else in the world seems to be interested in this stuff, but I haven't had it here.
Do you think it has anything to do with noisy American culture?
I have no idea.
Just something different.
I don't know why. I'll take it wherever we can get it.
Is it still being shown in Paris, or is it moved to Sydney now?
No. It's being shown at the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts. It just
Okay.
started in October. I mean, in November, and then goes to Sydney in a couple of weeks, and then to Lille, France, which is right on the Belgian border, assuming there's no war in Europe, in May.
Mhm.
So it's going to be shown in 3 places around the world, completely encircling the globe.
And do you get to go to each one?
I do.
Good.
Yeah. We do if we want,
If you want.
and we
Or
want.
say that's a good thing.
Well, no, I want to see this thing in Sydney because they're going to project the spectrograms on the sails of the Opera House,
Which is
Which-
incredible.
I've got to see that. That's one thing I want to see in my life.
That's definitely worth the 19-hour plane ride.
Yeah.
Now, if you're asking people to listen as your sort of final, this is what you can start to do for your soundscape, what's the next step after listening?
I don't know what the next step is after listening. I am just a listener, and that's what I do for a living. And I produce my work of art is just scaled in a way that I want to show people the wonder that I'm able to experience when I do listen. And so I create these works of art that convey that.
All right. Well, I think with that, I think we can just advise everybody to turn off the screens, go for a good walk outside, and listen to whatever they can find outside and in their own lives. Do you have anything else you'd like to leave us with, Bernie?
Yeah. I just hope that people have a chance to hear this world, the beauty in this world before it all goes. We're down in, there was just a report that said that since 1970, we've lost 3 billion birds in North America, which really affects the density and diversity. And we're suffering from certain effects of climate change right now. And I just hope that people get it together and take this stuff seriously and start acting in a way that helps mitigate it.
Thank you very much for that. And thank you everybody so much for joining us this evening and for helping me and my Luddite soul with all of this. And I hope everyone has a great evening at this. So
We
very
thank you,
much.
Rosie.
Thank you.
It's been
All right.
terrific.
Have a good one. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Bye-bye.